Story 1. The Man in the Red Coat. Emily was in a rush, her list of gifts incomplete and time slipping away. The mall was packed with last-minute shoppers, their laughter and chatter filling the air. She zigzagged through the crowd, clutching her shopping bags, when she first noticed him. A man in a long red coat, standing still in the middle of the bustling mall. He wasn't shopping. He wasn't talking. He was just watching her. At first, she thought it was a coincidence. Maybe he was just resting. But as she moved to another store, there he was again, leaning against the glass door, his gaze fixed on her. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She reminded herself it was Christmas, and maybe he was just being friendly or waiting for someone. Yet his piercing stare told a different story. She tried to ignore him, darting into different shops and keeping her head down, but he seemed to appear wherever she went. It was impossible. How could he move so quickly through the crowded mall? Her heart raced as she decided to leave, hoping the fresh air outside would calm her nerves. But the moment she stepped out into the cold, dimly lit parking lot, she saw him again, standing near her car. Emily's heart pounded as she walked briskly toward her car. She clutched her keys tightly, glancing over her shoulder. The man hadn't moved, but his gaze never wavered. She pressed the unlock button on her key fob, the car's lights flashing in the darkness. As she got closer, she noticed the man was now walking toward her, slowly but deliberately. She quickened her pace, nearly tripping over her own feet. She slid into the driver's seat, locking the doors as quickly as she could. Her hands trembled as she tried to start the car. The engine sputtered but didn't turn over. She cursed under her breath, trying again and again, but the car refused to start. That's when she heard it. A faint tap on her window. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. Turning her head slowly, she saw him standing inches away from the glass, his face illuminated by the dim overhead light. He was smiling, but there was something unnatural about it, as though his face was stretched too tight. His eyes seemed hollow, almost lifeless. "Need help," he mouthed through the glass, his voice inaudible, but his words clear. Emily shook her head frantically, refusing to roll down the window. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers numb with fear. But when she looked back, he was gone. The parking lot was empty. She locked the doors again, her paranoia rising. Suddenly, the rear-view mirror shifted, and she caught a glimpse of something moving in the back seat. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she stared into the rear-view mirror. A shadow moved in the back seat, barely distinguishable in the darkness. Her body froze, and a cold sweat broke out across her skin. She didn't dare turn around, but kept her eyes fixed on the mirror. "Get out," a low, raspy voice whispered from behind her. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white, and finally mustered the courage to turn her head. The back seat was empty. Her mind raced, her heart pounding like a drum. Was she imagining things? Without thinking, she turned back toward the mirror, and this time, the man was there. He was sitting in the back seat, his face so close to hers that it felt as though he was breathing down her neck. His grin stretched impossibly wide, and his eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. Emily screamed and scrambled for the door handle, but the locks wouldn't budge. The man leaned closer, his grin never fading. His voice was low but clear. "You shouldn't have ignored me." Suddenly, the car lights flickered, and everything went black. Emily's scream echoed through the parking lot. When security arrived minutes later, the car was empty, the doors locked from the inside. The only thing they found was a single red coat draped over the driver's seat. The mall's security team reviewed the parking lot footage the next morning, hoping to piece together what had happened. The video showed Emily walking toward her car, visibly distressed, her head turning to glance over her shoulder. But something was off. In every frame, she was entirely alone. There was no man in a red coat. As they continued watching, the footage became even stranger. Emily got into her car, and for a few moments, everything seemed normal. Then, The lights on her car began to flicker, and the vehicle shook violently as though someone or something was inside. Her scream was audible even through the grainy footage, but by the time the guards arrived, the car was empty. Police found no signs of a struggle, no fingerprints, and no evidence that anyone else had been there. But there was one peculiar detail, the red coat they found in her car. When they examined it closely, they discovered it wasn't just any coat. It was dated, tattered, and decades old, with bloodstains that seemed to have faded over time. Further investigation revealed an unsettling connection. 5 years earlier, on Christmas Eve, a man wearing a red coat had been fatally struck by a car in that very parking lot. Witnesses claimed he'd been behaving strangely before his death, watching shoppers and following them to their cars. Emily was never found. Her family searched endlessly, but every lead went cold. Some say her disappearance was an unsolvable mystery. Others whisper that she was taken by the ghost of the man in the red coat, destined to join him in the shadows, haunting the parking lot every Christmas Eve. Story 2. The Whispering Mannequin. Alex hated closing shifts. The holiday season meant long hours, endless customers, and the eerie silence that followed when the store finally emptied out. He worked at a boutique known for its extravagant Christmas displays, and this year's centerpiece was unsettling, a lifelike mannequin dressed as Santa Claus. The mannequin stood at the front of the store, greeting customers with an unnervingly cheerful pose. Its glassy eyes seemed too realistic, almost as if it was watching. Alex dismissed the unease as exhaustion. After all, it was just a mannequin, an expensive decoration to attract shoppers. But that night, as the last customer left and Alex began cleaning up, the store felt different. He was stacking scarves on a shelf when he heard it, a faint whisper. He froze, straining to hear, but the sound stopped as quickly as it started. "Just tired," he muttered, shaking his head. But when he glanced toward the front of the store, the mannequin seemed to be standing at a slightly different angle, its head tilted ever so slightly in his direction. Alex laughed nervously, convincing himself it was his imagination. He resumed his tasks, but the whispers returned, soft and insistent, like a voice trying to get his attention. They seemed to echo from nowhere and everywhere all at once. As the hours dragged on, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. Every time he glanced at the mannequin, it felt closer, even though he hadn't seen it move. He told himself it was just his mind playing tricks, but deep down, he wasn't so sure. Alex tried to focus on his tasks, but the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They weren't words, just a low, disjointed murmur that made his skin crawl. He turned off the music in the store, thinking it might be interference, but the whispers persisted. The mannequin now seemed to dominate his peripheral vision. He swore it wasn't in the same spot as before. Its head was slightly turned, and its hand, once outstretched in a welcoming gesture, now pointed vaguely toward the back of the store. Alex felt a lump in his throat. He laughed nervously, shaking his head. "Just tired," he told himself again, but his voice wavered. Minutes later, a customer rang the store's bell, startling Alex. The man complimented the decorations, but made a passing comment that sent a chill down Alex's spine. "That Santa's almost too real. Creepy, don't you think?" Alex smiled weakly and hurried the man out, relieved when the door clicked shut. But his unease grew. The whispers started again, louder now and more urgent. The mannequin's eyes, those cold, glassy eyes, seemed to follow him wherever he moved. Then came the footsteps. Soft, deliberate steps echoed through the empty store as though someone was pacing. Alex spun around, but no one was there. The whispers seemed to intensify, blending with the footsteps. He felt trapped, every nerve in his body screaming at him to leave, but his curiosity held him back. Summoning his courage, Alex approached the mannequin, determined to move it back into position and put his paranoia to rest. As he reached out to touch it, He swore he saw its chest rise and fall, as if it were breathing. The lights flickered and a chill swept through the store. Alex stumbled back, his heart racing. The mannequin's head now tilted fully toward him, its expression twisted into a sinister grin. Alex backed away, his hands trembling. The whispers had grown into a cacophony, filling the store with an otherworldly hum. He stumbled over a display rack, nearly falling, but his eyes never left the mannequin. Its grin was impossibly wide now, its teeth sharp and jagged where none had been before. As he scrambled to his feet, the lights flickered violently, plunging the store into moments of complete darkness. When the lights returned, the mannequin was no longer by the display window. It was now standing in the middle of the store, mere feet away from him. Alex's breath hitched as he froze in place. The mannequin's hand, now grotesquely bent, pointed directly at him. It wasn't just standing still anymore. It shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, like something alive struggling against its form. "Stay away!" Alex screamed, grabbing a metal rod from a nearby rack. He swung at the mannequin, but it didn't move. The whispers, however, grew louder, now sounding like mocking laughter. He turned and bolted toward the storeroom, slamming the door behind him. His hands fumbled to lock it, his mind racing. The whispers followed him, seeping through the cracks in the door, echoing in his head. Suddenly, a loud thud rattled the door. Alex backed away, his heart pounding. The whispers stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Then, the doorknob began to twist. The doorknob twisted slowly, and Alex felt his stomach drop. He pressed his back against the far wall, clutching the metal rod tightly, his knuckles white with fear. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond it. For a brief moment, Alex thought maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. He crept toward the door, peeking out into the store. It was eerily silent, the lights flickering sporadically. The mannequin was nowhere in sight. Relief began to wash over him, but it was short-lived. He turned back to the storeroom and his blood ran cold. The mannequin was standing inside, blocking his escape. Its posture was grotesque, limbs unnaturally bent, and its head tilted almost upside down. Its eyes, those lifeless glass eyes, were now glowing faintly in the dark. The whispers returned, louder than ever, filling the small room with their maddening noise. The mannequin moved, its stiff joints creaking as it took one deliberate step toward Alex. "No, no, stay away!" Alex screamed, swinging the metal rod wildly. The mannequin didn't flinch. It loomed over him, its grin stretching unnaturally wide, revealing rows of jagged, sharp teeth. The lights flickered again, plunging the room into complete darkness. Alex's screams echoed through the store, then abruptly stopped. The next morning, when the manager arrived to open the store, everything seemed normal. The Christmas displays were untouched, the racks neatly arranged, but Alex was nowhere to be found. There was, however, a new addition to the window display. A mannequin stood front and center, dressed in Alex's uniform. Its face was eerily lifelike, frozen in a twisted expression of terror. Story 3. The Gift That Kept Watching. Mark always struggled to make Christmas special for his daughter Sophie. This year, with money tight, he searched for something unique but affordable. At a small flea market, he came across a vintage music box, adorned with intricate carvings of angels and stars. It played a hauntingly beautiful melody, one that seemed to draw him in. The vendor, an elderly woman with a peculiar smile, handed the box to him. "This is no ordinary gift," she warned. "Treat it with care." Mark chuckled, brushing off her cryptic tone as part of the sales pitch. He bought the box, thrilled to have found something Sophie would love. That night, he placed the music box on Sophie's nightstand, winding it gently. The melody filled the room, soft and soothing. Sophie was enchanted, her eyes lighting up as the little ballerina inside twirled gracefully. But as Mark left the room, he thought he heard the music change. A faint, discordant note, almost like a whisper. He paused at the door, but the room was silent. Shaking his head, he dismissed it as his imagination. What he didn't see was Sophie staring at the music box, her small fingers hovering over its surface. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling. The lady in the box smiled at me. Mark was startled when Sophie told him about the smiling lady. He chuckled nervously, brushing it off as a child's vivid imagination. "It's just a toy, sweetheart," he assured her. Sophie nodded hesitantly, but kept glancing at the music box as if expecting it to move. Over the next few days, strange things began happening. The music box would start playing on its own, the haunting melody echoing through the house. Mark tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was an old mechanism or a loose spring. But even when he wound it down completely, it would still start up, the tune growing more distorted each time. Sophie's behavior also changed. She became quieter, her cheerful demeanor replaced with an unsettling stillness. She claimed the lady in the music box wasn't just smiling anymore. She was talking to her. Sophie said the lady told her stories about places she'd never been and people she didn't know. One night, Mark woke to the sound of faint music. Groggy and disoriented, he followed the sound to Sophie's room. The door creaked open, and he found her sitting upright in bed, staring at the music box. "Sophie?" he whispered. She didn't respond. Her wide eyes were fixed on the box, which wasn't playing music anymore. Instead, it emitted a low rhythmic hum, almost like breathing. Mark rushed to her side, shaking her gently. Sophie blinked and turned to him, her face pale. "She's mad, Daddy," she said, her voice trembling. "She doesn't like you touching her." Mark's stomach churned. He grabbed the box, determined to throw it away, but the moment he touched it, a piercing scream filled the room, not from Sophie, but from the music box itself. Mark stumbled back, dropping the music box as the chilling scream echoed through the house. The box hit the floor, but instead of breaking, it continued to emit that horrifying wail. Sophie cried out, clutching her ears, as the lights in the room flickered wildly. Determined to end this nightmare, Mark grabbed the box and stormed out of the house. He drove to a desolate field miles away, the music box still humming eerily in the passenger seat. The air inside the car felt heavy, oppressive, as though something was watching him. When he reached the field, he flung the box as hard as he could into the darkness. It landed with a dull thud, and for a moment the night was silent. He stood there breathless, convinced it was finally over. But then the melody began again, soft at first, then louder and more distorted. The sound seemed to come from all directions, enveloping him. Mark turned frantically, searching for the source, but the field was empty. Suddenly, a cold hand gripped his shoulder. He spun around, but no one was there. His breath came in ragged gasps as he heard a voice, faint but unmistakable, whispering from the shadows. "You can't leave me, Mark. I belong to her." The music box's haunting tune grew louder, and Mark's vision blurred. He felt himself being pulled into the darkness, the melody echoing in his ears as the world around him faded. Mark's car was found the next morning, abandoned on the side of the road. The engine was still running, and the driver's door hung open, but there was no sign of him. Inside the car, sitting perfectly on the passenger seat, was the music box. It played its eerie tune softly, the ballerina spinning in slow, deliberate circles. Back at home, Sophie woke up to find the music box on her nightstand, just as it had been before. A note was tucked beside it, written in her father's handwriting. "For you, forever." Sophie stared at the box, her face blank. The ballerina's reflection in the tiny mirror wasn't her own. Instead, it was the faint outline of a woman with glowing eyes and a wide, sinister smile. From that day on, Sophie never spoke about her father again. The music box remained in her room, its melody playing at odd hours. And at night, Sophie could be heard whispering to someone, her soft voice mixing with the hum of the box. Neighbors said the house felt different after Mark disappeared, cold, unwelcoming. They avoided it, especially during the holidays. Some claimed they could hear the music box playing faintly if they got too close. Years later, the house was abandoned, but those who dared to enter swore they saw a little girl's shadow sitting by a window, humming a hauntingly familiar tune, her gaze fixed on the music box that kept watching.